Hi, Anna.
Hi, Poonam.
How did your team select the 5 core financial principles?
We looked at what the theory suggested would be the main principle at the basis of financial decision making. We identify as interest compounding, inflation, risk diversification, taking advantage of tax favor asset and employer matches as really the simple and fundamental concept that people should know and should, in a sense, use in their financial decisions. So part of that really came from the theory, and part of that came from the decision making that we think we want to inform and target.
These are such basic concepts, but people seem to have difficulties with learning these concepts. What are some of the difficulties?
It's a very important question. I think from some of the work we have done, we find that people lack numerical abilities. So, part perhaps is the fact that people have difficulties with math and math concept, and which we definitely incorporate as well in our intervention. So we try to explain this concept, for example, without using math and instead using stories or using simplification. And the more I work in measuring financial knowledge and perhaps looking at this, I start to think that perhaps the math part is a barrier for people to both, I think, grasp this concept and also apply them. And others, sometimes I wonder whether it is lack of attention, and perhaps it's the fact that we haven't taken into account how much people learn or grasp certain concepts. And some are potentially more difficult. I think the concept of risk diversification is potentially not such a simple concept.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you're using videos and narratives, and I think that's such an innovative way of helping people learn these 5 core principles. Can you give an example of how someone may have described one principle in a narrative, so we can, as the viewers, we can get some idea about what we should look for?
Certainly. So, for example, we explain the concept of inflation as telling the story of buying a shirt, and buying a shirt that actually reminded someone of a shirt they have bought when they were young. And so kind of this idea of how the purchasing power changes over time, was a way to, make this more salient and make people understand that prices have really changed over time, which is really at the basis of inflation. We try to, for example, explain the concept of risk diversification using this simple metaphor of not putting all of your egg in one basket. And it seems to be a powerful metaphor that people grasp, and we try to incorporate it in a simple narrative.
Now, one of the challenges that your project faces is that with older populations, you would expect them to intuitively understand that prices have changed or the value of risk diversification. But you actually targeted a younger population. Can you comment on that?
We targeted the young on purpose because our research shows that the level of financial knowledge is particularly low among the young. And what the young miss as well is experience. So, for example, in the current period, if you are a young person, let's say below the age of 35, chances are you have never experienced a period of very high inflation. And very interestingly, our research shows that the older generation knows inflation and knows more depending on whether they live in inflationary episode. So the young, in a sense, miss and lack experience, and they might not have been exposed to some of this concept, and if they haven't been taught in class or in a school, they might really lack some of this concept, and that's why we think it's such an important group to target, and that's why we feel that perhaps we don't need them to push them through an experience, but we can teach via stories and via other method, ways for them to understand and to learn from events that have happened or from a concept what is potentially important for them to make financial decisions.
Now, in your project, you actually did focus groups and gathered some primary data prior to selecting these narratives and videos. Was there anything that you found that surprised you in that early work?
First of all, I really enjoy the focus group because it's such an interesting way to understand perhaps what we are missing from the picture, and I think it's also so humbling to hear how articulate are people and how much they have clear in mind what they would like to do, and at the same time how much is the gulf between what they would like to do and how to get there. In terms of our intervention, I think we were surprised by how similar, in a sense, the two interventions really were. We thought that the visual just by themselves would be so much more powerful because, particularly for people that perhaps are less literate, the visual would be a simpler and more effective way. But we have found that the story per se, I think, resonate with people as well. That was, I think, an early and powerful indication that also then the data later on confirmed that, indeed both methods seem to be effective, and, there wasn't as many differences as we were expecting.
It sounds like a really promising project. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.